When people talk of the Lancashire coalfield, they usually mean the area east of Wigan, where the mining industry followed the same industrial pattern which was seen in other areas of the country. However, another industry grew up at the same time. This was more localised, more personal, and full of features which were peculiar only to itself. This other industry was contained in West Lancashire. West Lancashire is made up of the largely flat area of land west of Wigan. There are few truly large settlements still displaying the mining heritage of the area. This heritage in itself is made up of a number of aspects, each with their own individual impact on the industry. Particularly important factors are the role of people in the industry, the situation of children, and the experience of women in West Lancashire. There are also some key case studies, namely John Pit in Standish and the Winstanley Pit in Windy Harbour. John Pit in Standish was a very productive site with excellent logistic links. The Standish and Shevington Coal and Canal Company, who owned the mine there, obviously foresaw a high level of profit from the pit as they paid a massive £104,225 to Lord Skelmersdale for use of the land for 50 years, and then upgraded the lease to a lifetime one. It was, however, the logistic links which really made John Pit stand out as a colliery. Linked directly to the village of Crook by rail track and the Douglas navigation through the village, John Pit allowed its owners to move the coal quickly after the mining process. John Pit, in conjunction with the Douglas navigation, was vital, for without the River Douglas, transporting the coal to the rest of the northwest would have been a much more difficult and very costly process. There is, interestingly, an accident recorded from John Pit, which took place on Christmas Day 1862. A local paper, the Wigan Observer, recorded the event as follows.
The gale, which raged so furiously in this neighbourhood on Thursday night and the whole of yesterday, was productive of a fatal accident at the Standish and Shevington Coal and Canal Company's John Pit, near Wigan. Between 5 and 6 o'clock yesterday morning, 6 men employed at the colliery entered the cage at the bottom of the shaft in order to ascend. Before the signal had been given, the noise of something falling was heard, and 5 of the men hurriedly left the cage. The 6th, James Gore, an old man between 50 and 60, was unable to follow the others before a tub of cannel, which had been blown into the shaft from the pit brow by the force of the gale, fell upon the cage, completely smashing it and inflicting such injuries upon Gore as caused his immediate death. Deceased reside at Crook, near Wigan, and he leaves a wife and 5 children.
The mine at Windy Harbour was one of the few mines in West Lancashire which remained active for over 100 years. Operating between around 1843 and 1979. The pit there was known as the Winstanley No. 4 pit and was ironically named Mountain due to its location at the top of a hill. The pit is very typical of West Lancashire, as it was a very small operation, at least in the early years of the industry. It employed just 22 people above ground and 9 below. This type of operation was typical as many mining enterprises in the area were very small and localised. The industrial activity was very limited there and therefore had only a small impact on the local scenery. This small-scale industry has now allowed the mountain pit to melt away completely. Crook Village was a vital part of the mining industry within Wigan, as it provided links between the Douglas navigation and the 3 mining pits local to it, the John Pit, Giant's Hall and Taylor Pit. Crook is an example of the community which grew up around the mining industry. Because further housing was created around the time of the sinking of the John Pit, when further miners moved to the area for work. The houses built were typical of the time, as they were large, terraced, 3-storey houses fit for the large families of the period. The proposal to make the River Douglas navigable was based on the principle of supply and demand. The demand for coal in towns and cities, such as Liverpool, was growing, and the Wigan area had a large supply of relatively accessible coal. As early as the end of the 17th century, Liverpool had developed many industries, such as pottery making, sugar refining, and copper works. It also had a large and important port, all of which needed a regular and steady supply of fuel. Poor road conditions meant that efficient transportation of coal would not be made possible, and little coal was mined. Therefore, other options were considered. Thomas Steers surveyed the River Douglas in 1712 to find whether it could be made navigable. This survey resulted in a bill to this effect being presented to Parliament on the 10th of April 1713. However, due to conflicting interests from landowners and other industries, navigation of the river was not fully opened until 1742. The completion of the Douglas navigation opened the West Lancashire coalfield to a larger market. The navigation was made possible due to the very flat and easy terrain which had originally surrounded the River Douglas. It is through the Douglas navigation that we see coal owners constructing short railways to transport their coal to the new waterway. For example, there were at least 13 railways serving the Orrell coalfields situated in West Lancashire between Wigan and Apley Bridge, a distance of roughly 5 to 6 miles. John Justice, shown in the bottom row in the middle, moved to Standish from Chorley to work primarily as a shaft sinker at the Langtree Colliery, which is based on the West Lancashire coalfield. However, his census entry indicates that he went on to become the pub landlord at the Hinds Hare. This shows a more diverse side to employment in West Lancashire. It also challenges the stereotypical view of mining life, and indicates that there were other job options open to some miners in West Lancashire. The information contained on the 1901 census for St James's Road shows again the variety of employment options for those living within the West Lancashire coalfield. This is the main road leading into the area of the Windy Arbour mine. Again, this census shows us that mining was not always the sole occupation of the household's inhabitants. A recent trip to St James's Road, the area of our census, indicates that the houses present on the 1901 census have now been replaced by a school. Like the mine of Windy Arbour, it seems this period of West Lancashire's history has largely been forgotten. The Blundell family ran an important business in the West Lancashire coalfield. Under the guidance of Jonathan Blundell, they originally made their living buying and selling coal and cannel from a number of mines along the Douglas navigation. However, Jonathan saw as early as 1780 that owning mines was a better way to make money in the area. He bought out his business partner, and by his death in 1800, his enterprise in Orrell was employing 24 miners, a rarity at the time. His son Henry continued to expand the business by buying and leasing coal mines all over the area, and at its height in 1892, Blundell and Company was producing around 1,800 tonnes of coal a day and employing 1,277 people. Before 1842, children had a very large part to play in the mining industry of West Lancashire, mainly due to the nature of the coal seams in the area. In comparison with the large seams found in other areas of the country, West Lancashire has an incredibly folded seam, with the depth of the coal not exceeding 2 feet in some places. The seam meant that the mines in West Lancashire could not use the pit ponies or shire horses, which were used underground in other parts of the country. In fact, the seam was that narrow in some places that a man could not pull or push the coal up the mine roadway. It was for this reason that child labour was relatively widespread in the West Lancashire coalfield. You can see from the picture that the work could only be completed by a person with the height of a child. It is also important to note that in the early days this was all part families working together, but later it seems to have become more exploitative. The role of women is incredibly interesting when looking at the history of mining in West Lancashire. Pit brow lasses, as they were known, were crucial to the mining industry. They provided relatively cheap labour, working at the top of the mine, sorting the coal from the rock that got mixed up with it during extraction. They would break the larger lumps of coal up so that they could be more easily transported and sold. Another interesting point regarding women employed in the mining industry is that they seem to have been viewed as an oddity. This is because they were very different to the majority of women in wider society. For example, they wore trousers when they were working, which was strange even amongst other women who worked, especially in the earlier period when the mines were being established. The importance of female labour was especially true in West Lancashire. There were a huge amount of women employed at the pit heads, with as many as 1,321 enjoying employment in the West Lancashire coalfield, compared to just 317 in the rest of the country. These women seem to have had a good position in West Lancashire, as the affectionate term pit brow lasses is much improved from the name bonky wenches, as women in the equivalent position were known in the Black Country.
The woman in the picture was called Jane Brown. She worked down the pits in Wigan, and here is a brief overview of one weekend for Jane. Jane puts on her blue shirt, a waistcoat, and the famous Wigan trousers and clogs. By late 20th century standards, she would be considered quite fashionably dressed, but Victorians do not consider trousers to be a decent form of clothing for women. Jane knows, however, that although women in other mining areas do not wear them, trousers are warm and very practical for her kind of work. She covers her hair with a scarf as the coal and dust gets everywhere. It is 4 o'clock on a September morning. Jane has to get up and go to work. The year is 1866 and Jane is almost 22. She lives with her family in a stone cottage in the middle of a neat row of houses at New Springs near Wigan, and she has to walk 2 miles daily to her work at the pit. She gets up quietly. There are only 2 bedrooms, and Jane has to share a bed with her baby and one of her sisters. In the other bed, her elder sister Lizzie and her child are fast asleep with another sister, Maria. Jane washes quickly in the yard and grabs her lunch, or bagging, her mother prepared the night before. Lizzie appears and they call on a neighbour who also works with them in the pit, and they set off for a day's work. Jane and Lizzie work for the Ince Hall Coal Company. Much like the rest of her family, who can be described as a typical Wigan mining family with all members involved in the pits. Today is payday, which is a relief as it means an early finish at 3 p.m. Jane's job entails the sorting of coal from the rock, which occurs from 7 o'clock in the morning till 5 at night. Jane gets very little spare time at home as she has to help out with the chores as well as working, which leaves hardly any time for recreation. Jane's lifestyle reflects the working lives of many women in Wigan, and is useful to gain an insight into the way in which female labour was used in the West Lancashire coalfield.
Coal is no longer mined anywhere in Lancashire, and as you can see from the video, the heritage of the mining industry in West Lancashire has completely disappeared. This video is of Mountain Pit at Windy Arbour, and where the mine once stood, there is now just a field and wooded area. Where heavy industry once existed, a rural landscape has taken over again. This is why the West Lancashire coalfield can be described as a forgotten history, as there are no visible remnants left today. Crook Village is yet another example of the mining industry's disappearance from the local landscape. Out of all the buildings that grew up with the local pits, including both residential and commercial premises, only the hall and some small farm buildings remain. The 3 pits in use around Crook, namely John, Giants and Taylor Pit, have all been reclaimed by the countryside after mining finished there. The flash phenomena is the result of the mine subsiding and gradually being covered with water and transforming into small lakes which are dotted around the West Lancashire countryside. Clearly, the gradual submergence of the once active industrial areas has removed the mining industry from the naked eye today. This physical disappearance of the mines themselves has made coal mining virtually invisible within West Lancashire. This has occurred just 150 years after the peak of production here. This really shows the peculiar nature of the mining industry in West Lancashire as, unlike other areas of the county, the localised nature of the industry allowed it to disappear from view with very little indication of the area's industrial past.